Hey everyone, this is Mitch, your logical libertarian here, and we're going to be discussing the topic of abortion. So as I'm pretty sure you may know, very recently, especially in the last couple of weeks, Alabama and Georgia have both passed bills that greatly restrict abortion. Alabama, they restricted it to where pretty much you could not have an abortion if you were aware that you had a pregnancy. And if a doctor performed an abortion, they could face anywhere from like 1 or 2 years to virtually life in prison, 99 years. It's overkill, it's overreach, and it's excessively restrictive. The reasoning in Alabama was much less thought out. Georgia, while worse, because there's some vague language in it that can allow for interpretations and can lead to even worse things, it at least makes it a lot more clear what their goal is. And they do provide one thing that better in theirs than the Alabama one, but they both do kind of play to the same thing. So we'll go over what's in the Georgia bill, we'll go over Roe V Wade, we'll go over the Constitution, and we'll look at a few other things, because the debate here isn't so much about whether or not a woman has the right to privacy in having an abortion, especially up to a certain point, like viability. The debate is where viability lies and whether or not it's up to the state to step in. That's where the debate should lie. The reason why conservatives and progressives don't play that is because they don't think like that. They both think the state should have a hand in morality and a hand in our lives, a hand over our own autonomy. Both sides will try to say that they believe in self-autonomy, but they completely backtrack on that. So, first let's go over some things in the actual bill here. So, for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. They're just changing it from the Roe v. Wade limitations to a heartbeat rule. Alabama did kind of the same thing, and they based it off a heartbeat, which the idea is that a fetus is viable if it has a heartbeat, and that's it. So that's the argument that it's coming from. And then the second part here, down at the very bottom, this is where it shows the issue. Yeah, there's some good things in here. Again, if a doctor determines a fetus to be unviable, that it's a futile pregnancy, or if it's severe danger to the woman, typically they allow that. So I give them that, but they don't give any exceptions to other things. I mean, they do give an exception to rape as long as it's been reported. But here, Chapter 7, they amend, as used in this code section, the term dependent shall have the same meaning as the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, provided, however, that any natural person, including an unborn child at any stage of development who is carried in the womb, shall qualify as a dependent minor. Any citizen of this state shall have standing, so, obviously there. But here's the other thing that's very important. In every case of the homicide of a child, minor or sui jure, there shall be some party entitled to recover the full value of the life of the child, either as provided in this code section was provided in Chapter 4 of Title 51. For the homicide of a child carried in the womb, the right to recover for the full value of the life of such shall begin at the point at which a human heartbeat is present. What that means is that a fetus is considered, in effect, no different than a child or a minor. They're considered to be a child. Further, if we look up here, there's Chapter 7 of Title 19 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to parent and child relationship generally is amended by revising paragraph 1, subsection C of Code Section 19-7-1, relating to in whom parental power lies, how such power lost, and recovery from homicide of child, as follows. Now, if we go over Chapter 7 of Title 19, Georgia Code, Chapter 7, we'll go Title 19, Chapter 7. Until a child reaches the age of 18 or becomes emancipated, the child shall remain under the control of his or her parents, who are entitled to child services and proceeds of the child's labors. In the event that a court has awarded custody of the child to one parent, only the parent has custody of the child is entitled to the services or proceeds. Parental power shall be lost by voluntary contract releasing a right to a third person, consent to the adoption of a child, failure to provide necessaries for the child or abandonment of the child, consent to the child receiving the proceeds of his or her own labor, consent to marriage, cruel treatment, a superior court terminating parental rights in an adoption proceeding, a superior court order terminating parental rights of the legal father or the biological father who is not the legal father of the child. So, what does this mean? If the state deems a failure to provide necessaries for the child, which a fetus is now a child, or if it's determined it's cruel treatment, such as, smoking, drinking, doing drugs, any sort of failure to be healthy, anything like that can fall under this. If it can fall under the same thing for a living child, it can fall under the same for a pregnant woman. So, what this means, the state is given the power to view the fetus the same as a child, meaning that Child Protective Services can intervene in a pregnancy if given probable cause. That means too that potential loss of life, if it's deemed worthy, if there's a case, perhaps CPS is called in, or if a woman miscarries and the father's very upset about it, or maybe you have an in-law that's really worried and doesn't like the woman and wants to break up the marriage or something, or get the woman thrown in prison. An in-law or anyone can report suspicions, such as they may have been doing drugs, they may have been doing, they may have been very unhealthy. Maybe even I saw them trying to do some things, do things that look like they might have been trying to get an abortion. This leaves it open for that. People say, well, it doesn't specify. Well, it doesn't have to specify. As long as it states that cruel treatment or failure to provide necessaries or necessities is in there, and it's a part of this. You have a case. Lawyers are very good at providing cases to link concepts. This is what I get pissed off at, you fucking idiots who try to propose we get this law and that law and that law and this law and restrict this and take away that. Oh, we're not saying we're taking away that. Yes, you are. You're allowing for slippery slopes to happen because you're not tidying it up. This isn't about a woman's right to choose. It is about the state having control over children and over families. Because let's go into another thing. The issue of the heartbeat and viability. And before we get there, I want to go over what Roe v. Wade means. Because a lot of people are saying Roe v. Wade has nothing to do with abortion. It's just about privacy, which is half true. Roe v. Wade is specifically about privacy, but it's about the privacy a woman has to have an abortion based on where the line of viability is listed. It's set forth an actual line of viability. Let's go over it. Because it says here, the issue is about viability. Women have the right to abort pre-viability without undue interference from the state. And then it states that post-viability, it's restricted. The state may restrict. The state may set laws regarding how it's restricted. And the state can legislate based on the interests of protecting both the woman and the fetus. Understandable. That's why things like partial birth abortion should be banned, because they're viable. Unless they're not viable, and in here, the court divided the pregnancy period into 3 trimesters. During the first trimester, the decision to terminate a pregnancy was solely at the discretion of the woman. It protects the privacy of a woman to make that choice in the first trimester. Correct. After the first trimester, the state could regulate procedures. During the second trimester, the state could regulate but not outlaw abortions in the interest of the mother's health. Meaning that you have to have medical necessity for it. It's deemed that it's a fetal pregnancy. There may be health complications. Perhaps the fetus is dead and you need to instigate an abortion to prevent her dying from septic shock. After the second trimester, the fetus is typically considered viable and the state can regulate or outlaw abortion from then on. Because at that point, it's deemed more to protect the life of the fetus. Of course, exceptions dealing with the protection of the life of the mother or even instigating an early pregnancy, which is still technically an abortion, in order to save the life of the fetus. What does that mean? Well, if the woman is pregnant and they need to cause a premature birth, that's still technically an abortion. If the child survives, it's fine. So, that's what Roe v. Wade is about. And this is typically what most libertarians, most liberals, most progressives, and even some conservatives agree with. They follow this, the law, or rather the steps of viability. That's how I feel. I typically am someone who thinks around 20 to 24 weeks. That's where you can just kind of outlaw with exception to determinations of medical necessity, because it is viable. The chance of surviving a premature birth or an instigated survivable abortion, where you instigate a premature birth to save the life of both involved, I can understand that that's going to work. 20 weeks to 24 weeks is about that time. Before then, up to about 10 to 12 weeks is where you get the first signs of complete organs or organs all being developed. And that's also what I can understand setting a mark there. Because at that point, you do have a heartbeat. At that point, you do have brain activity. At that point, you do have lungs and other organs developed or developing. And you could consider it to be a human life. At that point, I understand. So I give that range, and that's why I understand in the middle, between about 10 and 24 weeks, there being requirement of medical necessity, but it's not to the extreme that it is after that 6-month mark. So, that's where I am. That's where most people are. Or in some range, some mix of that, something similar. Now, of course, the reference in here is to the Constitution. If we look, now again, this is all, the different sections and everything else. We go to the Bill of Rights. Amendments to the Constitution. First off, I do believe this right here, the 9th Amendment, is all you need. Why? The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What does that mean? Well, you can't say, well, it's not in the Constitution to outlaw it. This goes for abortion, this goes for drugs, this goes for automatic weapons, this goes for anything like that. It may not be specified in here, but if it falls within the principle or can be determined to be within the spirit of the Constitution, yes. Now, if we look at the 14th Amendment, which is what's used, all persons born or naturalized, interesting, fetuses aren't born, in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. No state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge privileges or immunities of citizens, nor shall they deprive anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process. Now that's the first part. Without due process. So it's stating that you can't outlaw abortion. But there. Not something I necessarily agree with, but anyway. But they refer to the 14th Amendment. They also refer up here to these amendments, the 5th through the 8th, which is that no one shall be forced to be held accountable for things they don't believe are criminal. Now again, for me, it's mostly this one, the 9th Amendment. Further, the 10th Amendment, honestly, everyone misunderstands the 10th Amendment. That's a video for another time. But as we stated, we've gone over the fact that Roe V Wade was about abortion and privacy, and it even outlined a standard for regulating abortion that the states could use or can work off of. We went over over what the facts are in the Georgia law, and then the Alabama law. It should be noted that it isn't set up. The Alabama law doesn't so much have those provisions, but it does specify that doctors are to be physicians. Anyone who performs an abortion is liable. The woman or the person who the abortion's performed on is not held liable. That I understand to a certain point, but it is a bit unfair. It's kind of like how it's similar to the assisted suicide issue, where perhaps the person committing suicide, if they survive, they're not going to be held responsible, but the physician agreeing to it is. I understand that to a certain point. I understand where they're coming from, and I give them credit where credit's due for forming it that way. Now, something that's very, very important we're going to be going over the whole what is viability, because that is actually a big part of this, the big question, viability. If you look at this image here, You can see the stages in which, a fetus develops. You can see that typically around between 6 to even up to 11 or 14 weeks, the heartbeat may not even be developed. Sometimes it's typically 9 to 10 weeks for the heartbeat is developed. The central nervous system takes the whole time. Typically it's somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks where the brain, you start to see brain activity. So if you're going to use these, this provides a few different things. Now, they set it up to here. Once it becomes an embryo, they determined no more. They say it's heartbeat, but heartbeat sometimes may not be detected until almost the 10th or 11th week. But the embryo, when it's considered an embryo, before cells start to, after cells divide and it's an embryo now, it's now a small baby, that's where they consider it to be viable. However, fetal viability is typically around here. Around this area is where it could be born, because by this time, especially around here, just about everything has already developed enough to survive. Everything else that needs to develop will continue to go and can finish outside the womb. So that's where and typically around this time is where survivability of premature birth still shows. Now if we continue down, I'll show you another graphic real quick. Here. This shows roughly where things start. So around here is early embryonic development. Here's where it's finally considered an embryo and organs start to form. The first trimester, the second trimester up to the 24-week period. After the 4-week period, this is obviously where fetal development happens. After the 4-week period, this is where the chances of survival, which is the chances of surviving premature birth, that's where they go positive. This is where most people cut it off, and that's why. There's a good chance, and this gets better and better every year with the advancement we have in modern medicine. And of course, the goal is to set this back further and further and further, and to set the abortion limit back further and further and further. Maybe one day to have the ability to move a fetus from one womb to another. That would be a good idea, perhaps. Something like that, to be able to avoid causing the termination of the life of a fetus. Agreed. But that isn't always what we're going to get. Now, going over this too, one of the big things that really bugs me is the way this is argued, the way this is debated. Many people in this discussion, they come to the debate only focusing on, well, this is about saving a life, or this is about, or saying the state shouldn't be regulating in this. And typically the people who say the state shouldn't be regulating abortion are people who are completely okay with the state regulating healthcare, guns, everything else. They're okay with the state having their hands involved. They don't like the state being involved in this. And the people who are okay with the state stepping in to tell women and families where, you can't have an abortion. You get pregnant, you have to go through with it no matter what. Saying that, the state shouldn't do that. They're the same people who don't want public education. They don't want the government involved in teaching their children or raising their children or getting vaccinated or any of that kind of stuff. They're okay with the state trying to save the life of a fetus but they don't like the state trying to save the life of children. They don't like the state providing for children. They're against things like welfare and that, and they're pro-death penalty typically. So these two main sides are hypocritical. Obviously, there is plenty of overlap where some of the people who are pro-life or against the death penalty and are okay with vaccinations, and not as hypocritical. Same with people who are pro-choice, who are also in favor of limiting the state's involvement. See, I'm like that. I'm pro-choice and very much against federal and state governments from being so heavily involved. If a city or county wants to outlaw abortion, they can. You can just move out of a city or county. But a state or the actual federal government is a bit of a different story. They cover a much larger region, and that's a much more difficult and more centralized power to deal with, and I'm against that. But there's a massive amount of hypocrisy. I myself am a supporter of very limited powers of the state. Those powers being just about equally limited as the federal government, if not a little bit less limited, because the 10th Amendment does allow that. But the powers left to the state are also left to the people, and the rights can be retained by the people. And if the people determine the right to be retained, the state should not infringe. But anyway, the question now comes again. Is a fetus viable at 5 weeks or 6 weeks? No. A heartbeat is there, but it's an early development heartbeat. It's not the same as the heartbeat of yourself, myself, or even a newborn child. It's very different. It's the start of a heartbeat. It's essentially the basics, which is an electrical pulse to cause some blood to pump through what veins and arteries are there. You see, as it develops, similar to kind of our evolution, various things develop. It's why, if you notice, I think it's called what's called Evo Devo or whatever. If you follow the embryonic development, it also follows our evolutionary development. So you start off single-celled, then start to divide. You eventually reach a fish-like view, then slightly amphibious/reptilian. Then you become more mammalian and you develop more. And if you look at that too, a lot of other animals share. The surviving animals share in our embryology, especially other mammals. So at that point, at that 5-week point, it's not a fully developed heartbeat. Just like everything else isn't fully developed. The heart takes until about 12 to 14 weeks to be completely developed, sometimes a bit earlier. And it does vary from case to case. But if you're going to base it off of that, you've got to be careful. Because you could probably detect the electrical signal of a heartbeat, or what you would determine as one, relatively early on, even earlier than 5 weeks. But if you're going to do that, then abortion would need to be outlawed entirely. And again, you're now going to create the idea that a fetus has the same rights as a born living child, meaning they have the same protections too. The main reason I bring that up is in my arguments all the time, I bring up what does considering abortion murder and outlawing it before viability, what grounds and what does that imply? Well, the grounds is typically the idea that the fetus at an early stage is considered life and deserves legal protections. And I ask typically what types of protections. Typically they consider it a child, as in the Georgia bill. They're considered a legal child dependent. And when you imply that, you then have the same things, like as killing a pregnant woman is now considered double homicide or double manslaughter. Assaulting a pregnant woman would be considered double assault. Kidnapping a pregnant woman might be considered double kidnapping. And two, anytime a mother doesn't take care of herself, and of course we're talking about the extreme cases, not little things, but a woman doesn't take proper prenatal steps to ensure the healthy development of a child and neglects that, or is abusive to herself, she can be liable for wrongful death, child endangerment, neglect, and abuse. Do we want to go that point? Do we want to take it that far? And what happens when there's a miscarriage? When a woman miscarries, it's emotional. It's no different than an abortion. It causes a tremendous emotional and even physical toll. She doesn't need to have the state breathing down her neck, questioning her, making her wonder, did I do something wrong? Oh, did I smoke one time? Or drink? Did I drink when I was 4 weeks pregnant and didn't know it? And now the fetus had messed up, something messed up. Oh, I've been taking, and it could be, honestly, it could go as far as if you're taking, because here's the thing. You can get pregnant before your period or right after your period. And after 4 weeks, it's a fertilized egg but not attached. And if it continues to develop based off that, you're almost at the point of having an abortion, but chemically induced. Because birth control tricks. It causes the chemical instinct for the body to believe it's pregnant. So more eggs do not attach, but you continue to have your period. Meaning, whenever you have your period and you're pregnant and you have had a fertilized egg, that egg is a fertilized, developing fetus. And also, if you're taking birth control and you don't realize you're pregnant, and then you do realize it and you stop taking it, but you took it during the development of the fetus, you can cause severe issues. Is that going to be considered a problem? She was taking measures to not get pregnant. She happened to get pregnant. It's not 100% guaranteed. Because she was taking birth control, maybe other ways to cause, to prevent pregnancy, it can cause severe damage and developmental hindrance to the development of a fetus, which could lead to a miscarriage. Is she liable? Is she supposed to be held responsible? Where do you draw the line? These what-ifs may not seem too important to you, but when you start having in-laws sue and file criminal charges against women they don't like, or when you start to see fathers or men sue or file criminal charges against women because they wanted to have a pregnancy, the woman just keeps having miscarriages, might have a problem. To those of you too, the conservatives, especially in Northern California, who don't see the problem, don't see the potential for abuse. In my state of California, it was passed that if someone deems you mentally unfit and reports you to the sheriff department or the police department, your right to bear arms is taken away. They can come to your house and confiscate your firearms. That has liability for abuse, doesn't it? This is no different at all. Never grant the ability for the state to be used as an abusive tool against your neighbor, because it will be used against you when you least expect it. I really got to go full libertarian on this, and I am pissed off because I am tired of conservatives and progressives bitching about the state having too much power, then turning it over to them whenever it's convenient, whenever it suits their stupid political or religious views. I'm sorry, but we're in the land of the free, which means I have the right to be different than you, to have a different life than you, and to exercise different rights than you. Excuse the fuck out of me. Get your fucking nose out of my wallet and out of my life. Alright? It's not up to you to decide what I can do or what anyone else can do with their body or their money. To quote Thomas Jefferson, if it neither pricks my purse nor breaks my leg, I don't care. And I don't care. You're not harming me. And you're really not harming anyone else. Because to be honest, as we've discussed, viability doesn't really happen until about 20 to 24 weeks. And honestly, most miscarriages occur in the same time span that most abortions occur. And you know what might be interesting? Most women who want abortions oftentimes might have miscarried anyway. Perhaps the desire for an abortion is less having to do with just not wanting to face consequences of sex or not being able to handle raising a child. Perhaps instead, it's her body unable to perform the miscarriage, but her mind knowing she needs to. We don't know. And who the fuck are you or the state to tell her any different? Again, I understand those of you who legitimately care about saving life and are not hypocritical. Those of you, I applaud your consistency and I deeply understand where you're coming from. Those of you who are against the death penalty, who are against abortion, who support vaccination, who are trying to do everything they can to save life, to preserve life, and view life as precious, I understand where you're coming from. I disagree on certain things, but I understand where you're coming from. I myself support privacy, individuality, and I am damn okay with parents and women making their own decisions on how they raise children or if they're going to raise children. And I am 100% okay with threats to society being put down. So for me, it's consistent. Another thing, though, I'd like to offer to you conservatives before I go. If you're going to outlaw abortion, why not lift some of the restrictions you have on gay couples adopting? They're the least likely to ever have an abortion. They're the most likely to actually be loving and actually have a functional marriage, considering that they're not married because they accidentally got one of the others pregnant or societal pressures. They're married because they want to, regardless of the stigma or anything else. Why not give them that chance to give these kids love where maybe their parents can't? Think about that next time you want to make your argument about saving children. Of course, we all know you don't give a shit once they pop out of the womb. Thank you guys for listening. I really hope that this brought some ideas into your heads. Again, those of you who are pro-life but you support, the preservation of life in like all aspects. Again, I understand we're just at a fundamental disagreement, but I respect your position. I'm here to call out the conservatives who are against abortion but are also against everything else that could be done to either reduce abortion, such as promoting sexual education in school, promoting just better, things that will promote a better economy, trying to take away some of the social safety net programs we have for either low-income families or for kids, taking away public schooling, anti-vaccination, gay couples or single people adopting, and they're so anti-everything else that taking away abortion will need, the infrastructure we need if abortion's not there. It just pisses me off. And then I really cannot stand the progressives who are like, the state shouldn't do this, the state shouldn't be involved, when they support the state taking away the rights to free speech, the right to self-protection in the Second Amendment, and hell, even the right to search and seizure. Like, they're okay with so much, in favor of doxing and all that. So to me, it's so hypocritical, and I'm really tired of that. So, thanks for listening. Make sure to always research and think. Apply these concepts in abstract ways. Think about, if this is passed, what does it imply and what could it lead to? That's a very important thing, and it's something many lawmakers don't think about. What will this cause? What will happen? If I do X, what environment, economically, socially, culturally, whatever, what will that create? What good can come of it and what bad? And always think about how that could do. I'm always someone who thinks that the fewer things you need to implement, the fewer infrastructural restrictions and regulations and points that the state needs to be involved in, the better. That's how I've always felt. So, again, I've been your logical libertarian. Don't forget to think. Use your fucking head. Remember the logic. Take care.